Alrighty, so now we are on chapter 3 of John Whitberg's book, The Man with the Periwinkle Eyes, Fire and Rain. And I'm going to read as long as I can, maybe an hour or so, and hopefully I'm doing justice to being able to visualize, and I'm not reading too fast. I'm a little caffeinated right now, but I'm going to try not to read too fast. Alrighty, chapter 3. Oh, and I have my note because I'm so embarrassed I can't pronounce. Oh my goodness. Koningshuta. Okay, and Del Shao. It's obvious that I've had a second language ability bred out of me on many levels. So, anyway, that's what's going on. But I can restore that, right? Okay. Because, if you know more than one language, oh my God, you're smarter and you have more opportunities on this planet than most people. So it's a real advantage to be multiple language. I guess I wasn't cut out for doing those kind of jobs. All right. Chapter 3. The next phase was one of programming. It seems to have been, at least to an extent, customized to each child. Kyle's specific programming will be described in the following. After the merging of the images, Kyle's room was returned to darkness with no warning. He soon fell asleep again. An unknown period of time later, the door opened. Once again, 2 guards entered. Once again, both wore Waffen-SS uniforms. Neither spoke a word as they opened the crib and lifted the young boy out, removed his straitjacket, and placed him instead in a white undershirt. Water. Okay. He had clearly been in the dark room asleep for quite some time, as he found it rather difficult to move his limbs again. After redressing Kyle, the 3 entered the hallway and turned right. "Walk forward, now," one of the guards ordered, and so he did. They walked for a considerable distance through more long hallways, with a guard always directing with his nightstick where to go. Eventually they reached a room that was different from the rest. It had an entrance of 2 sliding glass doors. Kyle was marshaled inside. The room was huge and long. It had in it 2 rows of what looked like low-lying autopsy tables. Onto each one a child had been strapped. Each child had on a helmet and what appeared to be a pair of opaque black goggles. Both of these devices had an enormous tangle of wires coming out of them, which connected to a black box placed on the floor at the head of each table. At the foot of each table was a plastic plaque with the name of a deity from the Egyptian pantheon: Isis, Horus, Sekhmet, Apophis, and so on. Kyle could not yet read these. There were easily over 100 of these tables, though less than 20 were occupied. At the furthest end of the room was a long desk with perhaps 15 computer stations on it, all of them manned at that moment. Aside from the personnel at the computers, about 10 other personnel were milling about, all in SS uniforms of varying rank, save for one brunette female doctor in scrubs and a white lab coat. The nearest table to Kyle was occupied by a brown-skinned girl with the plaque on the end of her table reading Isis. Partly out of concern and partly out of curiosity, he reached out and poked the girl. She did not stir. He poked again, and as he did so, was greeted by the feeling of a jackboot being slammed into his head, causing him to fall to the ground on his face. He looked up to see one of the SS men who had obviously kicked him. Keep your filthy hands to your fucking self, you little shit, the man sharply screamed the words. Kyle began to cry, realizing truly the ordeal he was in. And why, he wondered, was this all happening? He wanted in that moment only to return to... Oh my god. Koninshita. Koninshita. I say the T with my tongue in the wrong position. Why can't I speak with a German frickin' Koninshita? Whatever. And his normal life. God, that's so embarrassing. Okay. Language, my good sir, and now you've probably damaged my subject. Great job. The reprimand came this time from a female voice speaking English. And so might have he, Dr. Krieger, Kreiger, Dr. Krieger, or Krieger, but I'll say Krieger, was the guard's reply. And so might have he, Dr. Krieger, was the guard's reply. From his position on the floor, Kyle saw the approach of the doctor. She was quite tall and quite conventionally attractive, with reddish-brown curly hair that hung just past her ears, and large hazel eyes. She wore blue scrubs and a pair of sensible black Oxfords on her feet. Your concern is most appreciated, she said to the young SS man. Now, if that will be all, officer. She squinted at the name pinned to his lapel. Hope. H-O. That's a strange letter. Oh, Hof. Wait. I'm sorry. H-O. What is that? What? Oh, you are dismissed. You will now please leave my subjects unmolested, if it's not too much trouble. Hof. Is that it? Hof. I saw a movie and the character had that name. Okay, I'm sorry, guys. With a look of obvious perturbation, the SS man Hof, or Hob, it looks like a H-O capital B. I'm sure John will correct me in a minute. With a look of obvious perturbation, the SS man Hob turned away. Dr. Krieger bent down to the bundle that Kyle had formed on the floor and brought him to his feet. Come now, young sir, we must not let them get to us, must we? She said in perfect German. The doctor's no-nonsense attitude reminded Kyle of his father and served to calm him somewhat. The doctor led the boy through the room to one of the low-lying metal tables. This one had a number painted on the head of the side, number 32, and the plastic plaque at the foot bore the name Sobek, S-O-B-E-K. Aquino walked by. This time he happened to be wearing a name tag reading COMM. Commander Aquino. Kyle took note of it instinctively, in spite of being unable at that moment to know what it said. I just have to comment that having this kind of memory is mind-boggling to me. Okay. The doctor lifted the helmet and its attached goggles and placed them on Kyle's head. There was nothing visible at that time, just blackness. He heard the woman snap her fingers, and immediately a set of large male hands were lifting his feet, while the doctor gently lowered his head and shoulders onto the table. Compared to the violent treatment he had been subjected to, he found this quite refreshing, though it was likely more for the benefit of the expensive equipment than his personal comfort that it happened. Oh, it was slightly more for the benefit of the expensive equipment than his personal comfort that it happened. Next, he felt his hands and feet being pulled into a spread eagle position, then restrained there, then further constraints being placed across his body. He felt his arms being rubbed with something cold and wet, then the unmistakable sensation of an enormous needle stabbing his arm and injecting a thick liquid. He whimpered at the pain, but was learning quickly to not complain loudly. What he did not know at the time was that the injection consisted of nanites designed to enhance him for the experience that he was about to undergo. Several minutes passed. "It should be set in by now, Doctor," he heard someone say in English. To his shock, he now understood what was said. Just like that. An image came over his eyes, a young woman standing in front of a blackboard. She began to speak. This was a virtual reality learning program. Due to spotty memory on my behalf, most details are unknown. However, there were approximately 100 such sessions, each lasting about 6 hours each. All the IBIS children underwent this programming. I hope that truck isn't loud. By the end, they were fully equipped to read, write, speak English and German with native level fluency, and had a basic understanding of combat medicine procedures as well as Nazi beliefs. The nanites they were injected with served to increase their IQ to well above the average human and expanded the capacity of their personal memory banks. Further programming was eventually carried out at the hands of Commander Aquino and his wife Lilith. This programming consisted of abuse of a ritualistic nature. For legal reasons and to avoid causing undue trauma to the reader, I am sparing the details. Those still determined to know are suggested to consult the large body of work which has already been written on the subject. Once again, during this time, no interactions were allowed between the IBIS children. The children also began to receive cybernetic enhancements. This included an in-the-brain antenna to amplify telepathy, third eye implants to maximize remote viewing, and further nanites to enhance strength. Eventually, perhaps 4 months after Kyle had arrived, all the currently present children were brought into the warehouse-like space from which they had entered. In the intervening time, it had filled up. Enormous shipping crates, some opened, could be seen. There was also a huge typing pool, a set of file cabinets, and one portion had been transformed into a makeshift classroom. It was to this section that the children were directed. Kyle took in the scene. There were easily 500 child-sized desks. However, by his head count, only 42 were occupied. Each had a nameplate with both the child's name and the name of the Egyptian god they had come to be associated with. Kyle eventually found the one which was labeled Kyle Delshau Sobek and took his seat there. Once all were seated, a man stood from his desk which faced the front of this makeshift classroom. Kyle recognized him as the SS man Kramer, who had escorted him here at first. Behind him, clearly not intending to be seen, was another man. He was also in full SS regalia with so many medals that it made one wonder how his clothes withstood all the extra weight. He looked perhaps 65, Kyle surmised, with short cropped gray hair and a rather prominent scar on his left cheek. His name tag bore the name of Emmerman. Emmermann. Kramer spoke. "Boys and girls, this is a momentous day. This is pairing day. Today you will all bond in avatar form with your chosen pair. Their names will be distributed presently." An SS girl began making the rounds through the room, placing a piece of paper on each desk. Kyle picked up and read his. It had Elsa Tyler, in parentheses Wadjet, Wadjet. So Elsa Tyler Wadjet printed on it. Kyle realized this must be his pair. No sooner had the group read the names printed on the pieces of paper given to them than Kramer instructed them all to stand and follow him. The group did so on yet another long march through identical hallways until they reached a room labeled Avatar Repository and entered. This is so good. It just really describes it and helps very much. Okay. The room was tremendous in size. The floor was concrete and smooth. Before them, the group could see quite easily a small city's amount of cylindrical glass tubes in groups of 3 stretching out before them. It was then that Kyle realized that this place must be using some form of technology to create rooms which were larger on the inside than out. I know how to do that. Dr. Krieger emerged in front of the group of children. Welcome to your new home away from home, the Avatar Lab. See these tubes behind me? These are your avatars. One is your adult form. The other, a copy of your associated God, quote-unquote, form. The third tube is empty for you to use. Please find yours, and our technicians will then assist you from there. Kyle found his without much difficulty. He stared in awe at his 2 avatars. One was of a man 6.5 feet tall and handsome. The other of a crocodile man over twice that height. Both were totally nude and immersed in a translucent green fluid, which the empty cylinder was also filled with. Next to the 3 cylinders was a stationary computer terminal with a technician seated at it. Okay, he's going to describe it. The technician at Kyle's set of cylinders looked up as he approached. He walked Kyle to the back side of the cylinders, where Kyle observed that a handy stepladder had been placed that led to the top of the empty cylinder. He also noticed, hovering just above it, a metal frame, human-shaped, in a spread eagle position with a hydraulic arm connecting it to the ceiling. Oh boy, you just reminded me of someone else who described this, who didn't want to get public. The technician, a petite, dark-haired man with glasses, then instructed Kyle to remove all his clothes and leave them in a bundle at the base of the stepladder, then to ascend it and enter the metal frame. Upon entering the frame, the hydraulic arm lifted it up to the top of the empty cylinder, then lowered Kyle and the frame into the cylinder. Kyle noticed that the fluid was thick, almost gelatinous. He instinctively held his breath upon entering, though the fluid was so viscose, he probably could not have breathed it even if he had tried to do so. Instantly, upon being immersed, he was overcome with a feeling of sleepiness he couldn't resist. Wow. Anyway, I'm making all these imagic connections as I read, but I'm trying to just read it. Okay. When he came to, he realized that he was being lifted from the cylinder by the hydraulic device. So when he came to, I have to comment. All right. As he was immersed, he was overcome with a feeling of sleepiness he couldn't resist. Why would I feel like crying when I read that? As if this sort of thing has been happening all the time in my own... Well, anyway, I want to talk about myself. I'm sorry. When he came to, he realized that he was being lifted from the cylinder. But that's how they do it. You get sleepy, and then you're submersing it so you're not freaking out, and the whole procedure goes on. Oh my goodness. Aren't they clever? Okay, when he came to, he realized that he was being lifted from the cylinder by the hydraulic device. He looked down and realized he was now inhabiting the adult human avatar. Isn't that crazy? Sorry, guys, this is for me anyway. He looked down and realized, hey, by the way, I hope whoever's listening has already gone to his website and downloaded this himself. That's the whole point I'm reading it, just to spread the word and help John spread the word about his story. Okay, that's the whole point. Okay, when he came to, he realized he was being lifted from the cylinder by the hydraulic device. He looked down and realized he was now inhabiting the adult human avatar. The child's body he had always known was in the cylinder to his left. Even more surprising to him was that he was not having any difficulty in animating it. It felt totally natural. The fluid simply ran off his skin like water off a duck's back, leaving nothing at all behind save a trace of moisture. You know, we'll volunteer for this, you idiots, instead of putting the kids in it. Anyway, sorry. Upon being lowered to the floor, the technician handed Kyle a robe. It was white, only barely big enough for Kyle to cover his decency, and there was no way to tie it. The technician also produced a paper and handed it to Kyle. A study of it revealed it was a map to a wing labeled housing. Kyle proceeded to follow it. He was met in the hallway by others in their adult avatars, all men at that point, and all following the same map. Upon reaching this wing, they discovered it to be a collection of numbered rooms. A woman was waiting for them. The men all attempted sheepishly to cover their decency when they saw her, though she clearly had no interest, as she silently went around and handed each man a key with a number tag on it. "Gentlemen," she said, "welcome to your new homes. You will be housed here when you are in Avatar. In your child bodies, you will be kept in your usual cage housing." Kyle's stomach sank at the notion of having to return to a child's body in the cage it was kept in, just as he was beginning to feel freedom in his newfound adult body that could flatten most people who might give him grief. So why did they keep him in cages? Because they were experimenting and they had to, keep the kid from whatever, subdue the kid, see, but anyway, okay, sorry. The men soon found their rooms using the keys they had been given. Oh man, I'm getting so many thoughts. Okay. Kyle entered his with some trepidation, but felt a massive wave of joy over his body when he did. The room was large, about the size of a hotel room, with a proper bed, the first he had seen since leaving. Oh my God, Koningshuta. Wait, here I wrote it down. Koningshuta. I'm sorry. Koningshuta. Oh my God. Where am I? Koningshuta. The O with the two dots is like kun. Kunigs, not ings. Koningshuta. My son's dad, they'd be laughing their head off listening to me try to pronounce this. Koningshuta. The bed was huge, nearly 20 feet in length. Oh, I'm so embarrassed, but hey, this is YouTube. I can do what I want. Koningshuta. Okay, the bed was huge, nearly 20 feet in length. To accommodate my Sobek body, he realized suddenly. "Welcome, Sobek," a female robotic voice said into the room's intercom as the door shut behind him. "Danke." "Danke," Kyle replied automatically, wondering whom he was thanking even as he said it. Kyle walked up eagerly to the most shocking sight in the room, the upper half of an entire wall that was taken up by a huge plate glass window with a mountain landscape visible in it. It was with some disappointment that he realized it was a television screen. Still, it was his first glimpse of nature in the months since he had arrived from Königshuta. Kyle was still examining the landscape when he heard the door into the room open and close behind him. He turned to see a woman, also scantily clad in an ill-fitting robe, standing in the doorway. She was tall, though a good deal shorter than Kyle was. She had shoulder-length black hair. Her most notable feature to Kyle was her eyes, which were a deep purple. "Welcome, Wadjet," said the robotic voice on the intercom. Oh, so his adult person was Wadjet. Avatar. After several minutes of each party trying in vain to conceal their bodies in the inadequate robes, they finally gave up and each extended their right hands to one another. "Elsa Tyler," the woman said. Then after a pause, she added, "Wadjet." "Kyle Delschau, Sobek," Kyle replied. As their eyes met, they both felt an urge to examine each other's bodies. As they did so, their bodies began to respond in a certain way, likely aided by the nanites they had received and the new rush of adult hormones they weren't used to. Had they been paying attention, they'd have likely noticed the faintest scent of pheromones being vented into the room. Lord have mercy. It was then that Kyle and Elsa realized, if only subconsciously, what was meant by pairing. They both instinctively moved toward the bed. Nature, if it may even be called such, took its course. In the following few days, all the IBIS members were given SS uniforms of the lowest rank, then summoned again to the makeshift classroom in the warehouse area. They were given a list which was the unit they were assigned to. Kyle's unit was as follows: Kyle Delschau, Sobek; Elsa Tyler, Wadjet; Roger Clement, Horace; Sandra Lau, Hathor; Joseph Fair, Apophis; Sienna Sinclair, Mott; Joey Stryker, Konsu. Their stories will proceed in the following chapters. Author's note: no doubt this chapter will have stirred some feelings in certain readers. Some may feel I have been too direct in the sexual scene. No, you haven't. Others may feel I've been too soft or censorious, and should have included detailed description of the abuse suffered by the children. No. As to the first matter, I was as delicate as I could be. As to the second, this book is not torture porn. Thank you so much for saying that. A huge body of work on the subject of ritual abuse already exists. The reader may consult these if they wish. Okay, where are we? 29 minutes. Okay, chapter 4. I suppose the first step is to give the reader a better idea of each of the members of Kyle's unit. Elsa Tyler was a British girl by birth, though at a DNA level she was a test tube baby, made by combining the DNA of the embryo she had been conceived as with the DNA of both Naga reptilian ETs and of a humanoid species from the constellation of Cassiopeia, which is what led to her having purple eyes. Her past life was as the Egyptian warrior goddess known as Wadjet, a snake with a humanoid upper body. Uh-oh. This is the species which is most commonly known as Naga. Her personal specialized skills were sniping. Snipping would have two P's. So sniping and the very delicate art of persuasion. A snake with a humanoid upper body. Wow, man, I just had a memory yesterday. It had everything to do with that form. Okay, Roger Clement was born in France to an African-French father and a German-French mother. He was also a test tube hybrid baby created by the Direction Generale de la Sécurité Extérieure, or in English, Directorate General for External Security, or DGSE, the French equivalent to the CIA. DGSE. His exact hybrid status is unknown to the author. This past life was as Horus, the falcon god, in reality an alien species from uncharted deep space with a roughly humanoid body with avian features resembling a falcon. His personal specialties lay in the direction of assassination with blades and close quarters combat. He was paired to Sandra Lau, Hathor. Sandra Lau was Chinese American, born in Hong Kong, but moved with her parents to New York City as an infant. Her past life was as Hathor, a sky goddess, who was in reality a member of the alien race commonly known as the Anunnaki, and by some as the Tall Whites. These are a human species that range from 12 to 15 feet tall, wraith-like, and with very pale skin. It's an interesting word, wraith-like. Okay. And with very pale skin. They originate on a planet known as Nibiru, which lies beyond the Oort cloud, and are known to have massive amounts of influence in the affairs of Earth. That's right. Sandra Lau was valued for incredible remote viewing abilities and uncanny skill with speedy and accurate memorization of numerous languages, both human and otherwise. Joseph Fehr, F-E-H-R, and I'm pronouncing it Joseph, it's J-O-S-E-F, but I'm saying the J English. Joseph Fehr was another test tube baby created from a human German father, mixed with a huge array of alien races and born from an artificial womb on Mars. His past life was as Apophis, a god of chaos, god in parentheses, by the way, a god of chaos, in reality a Naga, the same species as Elsa Tyler Wadjet. Joseph was valued as an all-around killing machine and for his diplomatic skills for relations between different species. He was paired to Sienna Sinclair, Mott, M-A-A-T in parentheses. So Sienna Sinclair was Mott. Sienna Sinclair was of unknown origin, though she was known to be a member of a powerful German family off-world and set to inherit her family's empire. Her past life was as another Anunnaki, the goddess of wisdom known as Ma'at. She was valued for her psychokinetic abilities, particularly pyrokinesis. Joey Stryker, real name Joseph, altered here to avoid confusing with Joseph Fair. Streicher is spelled Streicher. Streicher is how I want to say it. Was a German national and also a clone born as a surrogate to two British parents. Man, I hope certain people are listening to this that I think they don't know that I know they're listening. I hope you guys are listening. All you that want me to be quiet, I hope you're listening. Okay. Other details are lacking. His past life was as the moon god Khonsu, Khonsu. Of note is that the true history of Khonsu has been buried. For one thing, he was misrepresented as having the head of a bird to associate him with an avian species, when in reality he was a hybrid between humanoid and reptilian. He is also most often shown as the son of Amun and Mut, M-U-T, when in reality he was the son of Sobek and a humanoid Tau Setian woman who has been wiped from all records. Is that right? Joey's skills were in the field of interrogation. And a humanoid Tau Setian woman who has been wiped from all records. They think they wipe from all records, and yet they don't at the same time. Joey's skills were in the field of interrogation. Immediately after the unit was handed the slip of paper with their names on it, indicating they were a unit, they were called into a massive office that they were told belonged to the project head. The name plaque on the door read Sigmund Emmerman, in parentheses, Atum, A-T-U-M. So Sigmund Emmerman. The god, quote, the god from whom all the others came, murmured Sienna. Well, murmured. The god from whom all the others came. So Atum. The crew entered the office. They were greeted by the sight of the man who had stood in the background during their first briefing. He was tall and imposing, with thick gray hair and impenetrable gray eyes. His very presence commanded a certain degree of terror. It was Kyle who first finally spoke up. "You summoned us, sir," he said in German. Several of the other unit members flinched at his forwardness in the way he spoke to the man. "Yes," Emmerman replied, "I did. Partly as a congratulations and well wishes for your new unit, as well as a partial briefing. Your unit has been formed for one reason and one reason only: to combat the greatest enemy to our cause, the Giza Intelligence Group." The group exchanged confused glances at one another. As if sensing their confusion, Emmerman continued, "Giza Intelligence is an ancient organization, an offshoot of a group known as the Orion Syndicate. You will someday know what that means. Suffice to say, they are the anti-life. Oh, man. They are the anti-life. Opposition to the glory and honor that we all stand for. Our greatest enemy. Giza Intelligence Group. Gig. G-I-G. Oh, my God. I have a gig to do today. Is that an accident? Hell no. I've got a gig to do. Lord have mercy. Okay. Oh, my God. Okay. The group began at that moment, due to the programming they had undergone, to feel a certain righteous indignation, even against this group of individuals they had never heard of just 5 minutes prior to the conversation. Emmerman continued, "For operational security, you 7 are not to interact with your comrades outside of your own unit unless absolutely necessary. And when it is, you are never to divulge any information about your operations. You are to have a policy of 100% secrecy. Am I being understood? Yes, sir. See Kyle, the unit responded in unison. Magnificent. Now you may return to your station. I have a job to continue to do, Emmerman said. The group dutifully filed out of the office. I'm going to lower my voice for a man and then regular voice for a female. Okay. The next weeks and eventually months were spent on training. A particularly notable day was when the IBIS assets were placed into their non-human avatar bodies for the first time. Let us examine in detail this eventful day. The routine had been established that for the most of the day the assets spent the days in their adult bodies and every night were placed back in their child bodies and kept overnight in their cages, except for times when they were placed with their pairs as adults overnight in order to, quote, reinforce the bond, unquote. This day, however, proved different. At the appointed time, Kyle dutifully entered the tank. It was to his great surprise that when he emerged, he realized that he was incredibly tall and, looking down, saw a crocodile humanoid body. He attempted to speak, but found that his new mouth could not form words, only sputtering, growling sounds. Okay, another memory for me. Okay, Dr. Krieger was standing nearby, observing with a massive grin on her face. Good, you cannot speak as you have before. Think of the words you wish to say. Don't speak, just think, Dr. Krieger instructed. What the fuck? Was Kyle's immediate mental reply. I don't appreciate your language, Sobek. It is uncalled for. You knew this would happen, Dr. Krieger said in telepathic rebuttal. Hey, John, I'm not making fun. I'm not making fun if I speak lightly as I read, so I hope you know that. Okay. Almost without meaning to, Kyle whipped the tail on his new avatar body. He barely felt as it collided with the body of one of the technicians and sent him flying several feet. He turned to see it. The man staggered to his feet, trying in futile to brush the coffee off himself that he had spilled and cursing under his breath. From there, Kyle was ushered to yet another previously inaccessible region of the facility, this one a long series of training rooms, gymnasiums, gun ranges, virtual reality training zones, and so on. Kyle noticed as he walked through the hallways in his new God avatar, and he writes God in quotes, with a small g, just so you know, that now people stepped aside in obvious fear. He took a certain pleasure in this for some understandable reasons. I bet he wanted to bust out right there. It was into one of the virtual reality rooms that Kyle was ushered. This one, he noticed, had far larger than average chairs, some of which had holes in the back to accommodate tails, he realized as he awkwardly took a seat. Soon, all other members of Kyle's unit filed in. 2 human technicians followed. One carried a tangle of wires, the other a large black box. The one carrying the wires, a young blonde woman, quickly untangled them. On the ends of each one was an electrode pad. She proceeded to go to each asset and stick the pads on their heads. Try not to think for a few minutes, she advised cryptically. Okay, I didn't read it. Try not to think for a few minutes, she advised cryptically. Of course, this was not possible. Almost immediately, as the electrodes were connected to each other's heads, the assets were hit with a cacophony of voices, each other's voices. Then, just like that, it stopped again. The 2 technicians stood in front of the assets, and one, the young blonde again, spoke. The electrodes and wires link your brains. The box acts as a filter. Only active and intentional thoughts get through it. Only active and intentional thoughts get through it. Today, wow, so it can read the words. Today is an exercise in telepathic cooperation in a combat scenario, when using your voices would be a detriment. We will now attach your virtual reality headsets and the exercise will commence. After Kyle's headset had been attached, with some difficulty due to this avatar having a crocodile's head, an image came up on the inside of the goggles portion of the headset. He was greeted by the sight of a large, empty concrete room with a small table in the center. His other unit members, all in their, quote, God avatars, were also present in the room. Against one wall was a table with an assortment of weapons on it, 7 in total. 3 were swords, 1 was a meteor hammer, the rest were battle axes. The group was instructed to approach the table and discuss among themselves telepathically who was to receive each weapon. They followed the instructions. It took time to figure out the system, but within 10 minutes Kyle's group had become operational, with each member easily communicating, and all of them arrived. Oh, yeah, all of them armed. My eyes are getting tired. Okay, one of the technicians then said into the comms, "We're upping the ante, prepare yourselves." Without warning, the enormous hangar-style doors to the virtual building opened, and 3 creatures flew in. Kyle looked in horror for several seconds. The creatures looked like green, bloated vampire bats. Their bodies were perhaps 15 feet in length, and their wingspan must have been nearly twice this. And the stench! Kyle's shock broke quickly, however. "Fuck them up," he commanded telepathically to the unit. He swung his meteor hammer upward, instinctively knowing how to do it somehow. He heard a distinct crack as it collided with the shoulder of one of the monstrosities. With a shriek, the beast crashed to the floor. It got to its feet quickly, however. Roger, one of the sword possessors, charged the beast and rammed his sword into its lower belly, then twisted it and thrust upwards. The abomination's intestines spilled out, and it collapsed. Kyle looked up then to witness Sienna being lifted into the air by another of the bat monsters, which was now leaving the hangar. Her avatar dripped with blood from where the beast's claws had grabbed her. It flew out. One of the other unit members desperately threw an axe, but fell short. The creature flew into the digital sky and vanished. Then suddenly the simulation reset itself. Jeez. The technician's voice came over the comms again. "You screwed up. She's dead. Start again." All of this took place, of course, in far less time than it takes to tell. The exercise was repeated. None of the assets was allowed rest until they had completed the exercise with all these monstrosities dead and an intact unit. It took many attempts. Upon completion, the unit was expecting congratulation. This was not to be. They were all put back into their child bodies, then returned to their cages. They were kept in these without food or drink until they were on the verge of death from starvation. Only then were they removed from there. You see, why do they have to do that part? It was at this time that the unit was introduced to regeneration tanks. These tanks were kept in yet another laboratory. In these were another set of cylindrical tanks, much like those their avatars were kept in. These, however, were filled with an opaque white fluid, unlike the translucent green of the avatar tanks. They were subsequently lowered into these. They fell unconscious immediately, but they emerged energized and with all the weight they had lost regained. However, they still felt hunger. The punishment was not yet over, as they were then brought into another lab and fed intravenously. No real food was issued. Well, I probably wouldn't have been able to do much with it. Okay, This exercise was repeated many times. Every time it took multiple attempts, and for this the group was punished. As the starvation punishment took time, however, it was replaced with floggings with a leather whip that had metal rivets attached at odd intervals. Oh, Kenny said that's what the Jesuit priests used on their own backs when he was a child. Just saying. The group had to count the number of lashes they received, and if they counted wrong, it was started again. Before each flogging, they were injected with drugs so that they would remain conscious for the process. After the floggings, they were placed in the regeneration tanks. The settings on the tanks were altered so that the scars remained, and therefore, every time the unit changed in the locker rooms, at least while in child bodies, they would see the scars and have a constant reminder of their punishments and, of course, why they had been punished. This made them learn very quickly. Soon, once a unit could complete the exercise in a single attempt several times in a row, the number of bat-like abominations was moved up to 5, then 10. Then a new exercise was introduced. For this new exercise, the unit was placed into their adult human avatar forms. Instead of the hangar-like structure they were used to, the unit this time found themselves to now be outdoors. Kyle started in awe at the landscape surrounding them. No trees, no large hills, no greenery, just tan sand and brown and tan rocks. It was Kyle's first ever look at a desert. As the crew stood, they were suddenly aware that they were nude. "Hold still a moment. We're loading in the armor," one of the technicians said, as if reading their thoughts. As they stood, an armor did form to cover their bodies. It was white and appeared to be made of some form of metallic material, all except for the part of the helmet which covered the face, which was some type of clear blue glass-like polymer. After the armor had formed, the group saw something in the distance. An entire flock of the bat-like monsters was flying toward the group. God, it's like the Wizard of Oz, right? "Hey, we're fucking unarmed here," Joey shouted. Communication was easier in these avatars, since it was now possible to use their voices. "Hold out your arms," was the instruction over the comms. The group did so. As they did, rifles were loaded into their hands. Kyle had the barest familiarity with guns from his childhood in Königshuta. "Follow my lead," Kyle ordered the unit, and then aimed the gun upward and pulled the trigger. A gush of blue projectiles came out. The other members nodded in understanding. Elsa then fired her gun. However, she failed to take note of what was in her path. Joey stood near her. The projectiles shredded his armor and his virtual body collapsed. The simulation reset. "First rule when using guns, don't shoot your friends. Start again," the technician said flatly. And so the cycle continued. Exercise. Repeat until success, then punishments for the failures. The guns in the simulation never required reloading, and so the next phase of training began. The group was called into the makeshift classroom, again in their adult human avatar forms. On each of the desks was a set of guns, a semi-automatic pistol, an assault rifle, a pump shotgun, and a bolt-action rifle. Kramer, the SS man, stood at the front of the room and spoke to the students. "You will all turn your attention to the projection screen behind me. This is a class on the handling of firearms. The film will instruct you. You will follow the directions. As needed, ammunition will be handed out to you." And so it went. The film instructed on the handling and operation of each type of gun. Kramer made his rounds, handing out ammunition for each type so that the assets could load their weapons. Eventually they were led to the training area, which contained a gun range where they practiced with their weapons. Eventually they were taught about field stripping and the repair of guns. Due to the nanites and/or drugs they were given, their learning capabilities were accelerated to an enormous degree. Within perhaps 2 weeks, the assets were able to, while blindfolded, strip their guns, put them back together, and shoot them with alarming accuracy in a span of under 30 seconds. Blindfolded, you could do it. That's why Rantha taught everyone to do stuff blindfolded. Rantha said to the school, he said, you better learn what they know, because they know way more than you do. So when he taught us in the 90s, he said, you got to learn all this stuff because that's what your government's doing. Okay, this was followed by training in Chinese martial arts, once again via the virtual reality system. They also received some training in psychic warfare. However, due to limitations in my own memory, this unfortunately cannot be recounted in any detail. But that's what I am, psychic warfare. I don't have any memory or any feeling about physical weapons. Anyway, he just said it. Okay, the final phase of training was in that of combat medicine. Once again, all the assets were gathered into the makeshift classroom in their child bodies this time and shown a film. This one detailed the principles of medical care on the battlefield. Holy moly. After the class had been held, a test was administered. Kyle and Elsa, still in child bodies, were taken to a small room. In it was located a gurney and a low-lying table with all the medical supplies they had recently been familiarized with. Oh, geez. Before either of them could guess what was expected of them, a woman in uniform entered the room, produced a pistol, and shot Elsa in the stomach. She's dying. Pack the wound or cauterize. I estimate you have 3 minutes until she bleeds out. If she's dead when I come back, we do this again, the officer stated, without a trace of feeling in her voice. The officer left after stating this. Kyle rushed to the door but found it locked. He felt panic for perhaps 3 seconds. Then, as always, his rationality kicked in again. He ran to the table and assembled quickly all that was needed, somehow forcing himself to ignore Elsa's whimpers. He assembled all the necessary equipment and gave Elsa a shot of morphine, then proceeded to pack the wound. Elsa survived. The exercise was considered to be a success. After the completion of their training, Kyle's unit received a name, the Golden Fleece. All of them and the rest of the Ibis children had been at this facility for perhaps a year when they were assigned their first real mission. This will be recounted in the next chapter. Oh, good, because I'm at an hour and the machine is still going. Okay, author's note. I hope the reader decides I've included enough details here. I have decided not to recount every excruciating detail and could not anyway due to memory limitations. Okay, that was the end of chapter 4, and we are going to stop right here. Thanks, and I hope I did justice to that, and sorry if I if I messed up. I can't even believe my little perfect mind. Königshuta. I had to pick up the piece of paper just to read. Königshuta. Oh, Jesus, what is wrong with me? Okay. Love ya. Bye.